Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this, the first in a series of podcasts from NQA. NQA is a global certification and verification body providing services around all things ISO management system standards, but for the purposes of this topic, all things carbon and sustainability. So I'm Stephen Burt. I'm the Sustainability and Carbon Services Director here at NQA. We've called these podcasts Sustainability Simplified for the reason that at NQA we've got a great deal of in-house expertise, including my colleague Amber, who I'll introduce you to in a second, around all things carbon and sustainability. And whilst it can seem uncertain to some, a very challenging thing to try to understand and to try to implement in your business, hopefully this series of podcasts, along with the background materials and resources and tools and case studies that we have on our website, can help you, the listener, to understand better how you might be able to tackle the carbon problem in your own business, or make your own business more aligned with the concept of sustainable development. So Sustainability Simplified says exactly what it is that we intend to achieve via these series of podcasts. So as I mentioned, I'm Stephen Burt and I'm joined by my colleague Amber. Hi, Amber.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everyone listening.
Thank you for joining us, Amber, today. I'll give you a bit of background to myself. So, as I mentioned, I'm the Carbon Sustainability Services Director. I haven't always done that, though. Prior to my role, my current role with NQA, I was the Field Director looking after all of our auditors, many of whom I guess you may have met. And before that, I was in the field operations management team, and also I deliver various ISO audits myself, but I'm also a verifier. So I deliver the greenhouse gas verification service, the carbon verification service that we provide, and I also deliver some of our sustainability certification services as well. But in my current role, I bring to the role a wealth of expertise. I've been working with NQA for around 15 years, and prior to that I was involved in consultancy and in industry and in academia, but always with the underlying theme of carbon, energy and environmental management. So over the years, I've experienced in the very early days of my career a feeling that I was banging my head against a brick wall, trying to interest companies in carbon and sustainability. As things have developed, quite rightly, it's a much higher topic on the news agendas and the social media feeds. You see it every day, concerns around carbon, greenhouse gases, climate change and general sustainable development. So it's become much easier to have people understand what it is that I'm talking about, but also to engage with companies on the services that NQA are able to provide. I'll pass you over to Amber now. Amber will give you an introduction to herself as well.
Thanks, Steve, and hi to everyone listening. As Steve mentioned, I'm NQA Sustainability Assurance Manager. Some of you may have seen my face cropped up on different places with NQA, on our newsletter or different marketing pieces that go out. I'm the lady that is always talking things carbon. So I've been with NQA for 6 years now. Not quite as impressive as Steve's 15 years, but there we go. So I started off with NQA as a resource planner over in the scheduling team, moved across to the operations team and ended up here at sustainability. So my role is quite diverse. Anything to do with sustainability, you're likely going to come through me in one shape or another. So I support with the sales and any initial inquiries that we have, marketing, so the content and development around the tools and resources that we put out, the general day-to-day client management of our clients that we work with on all things sustainability, and the wider accreditation piece as well. So our governing body, UCAS, working so that we have the accreditation piece for the sustainability standards that we offer. Nice for everyone to come and join and listen along. Hopefully some faces on here that I've spoken to in the past and some new faces as well.
Thank you, Amber. I think, Amber, it's always been very impressive that you started out not that long ago, 2 or 3 years or so, with no real background in sustainable development or carbon at all. And you've done a cracking job in helping to develop the services at NQA, and in the process turned yourself into a carbon and sustainability professional. It is amazing that you've been able to do that, considering you didn't have any previous background in it at all. Do you want to let us know? I mean, the listeners must think to themselves, I don't know anything about carbon, or I don't know anything about sustainability. Is there any hints and tips that you might give them that might help them to achieve the level of knowledge that you've managed to gain?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, thank you for my title change there. I'll make sure that's put into my contract. Carbon professional.
Guru.
Yeah. You know what? It's actually a really good point, because you're right. I've been in the role now for 2.5 years, and when this role sort of was created, it was all new to me. And something that I definitely felt firsthand was very intimidating. It was definitely a development area for me to grow into and grow for the business. And now it's something that I live and breathe every single day. I think the key thing is that it's something that can be accessible. It can be broken down. It can often feel a little bit of a minefield as to what pathway clients should go down or what information you should be reading. There's a lot of conflicting messages out there, but just taking the time to read the materials that are out there, personally, through gaining and building relationships with consultants, with people in the internal business. That's something that's absolutely expanded my knowledge. And I think just taking the time to go through something, for instance, I've sat on the carbon calculation courses myself. I've helped to write those courses. It's something, like I said, live and breathe now. And at the start, I would look at one of those carbon verification spreadsheets, for instance, an inventory, and be absolutely blown away and turn my laptop off. But now, by taking the time to look at the resources out there, speak to people in the industry, and just take it apart chunk by chunk, that's really how I've come to terms with it. So something that I always say to our clients is, don't look at it as one big picture. Like, go through the frameworks that are out there. What's step one? What are we looking at? What are what the boundaries of what you're looking at, and just breaking it down and applying it that way. So, Guru is next.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big learning curves, perhaps for both of us as well, was when NQA itself began to look at its own sustainability performance and carbon performance. So, we have a pretty large team throughout Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We run around in cars. We occasionally jump on planes, we run around on trains, and a lot of us work from home, consume electricity at home, and so on. So the process of tackling NQA's own carbon emissions, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, but was your involvement in that process, was that a learning curve for you in terms of understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're an organization that want to practice what we preach, like you said, and being involved in that has been a really good eye opener. So it's good to see real life examples as to, reduction measures that NQA put in place, being involved with putting together the documentation, gathering the data, so on and so forth, so that I can firsthand see what our clients. That's definitely been a key thing, attending a lot of the training courses that we deliver, looking, internally what we do. And yeah, a number of the different projects have been really, really useful.
So, as we mentioned, this is the first in a series of podcasts that we'll do, but today's podcast is all about an introduction to what NQA ourselves do. So maybe Amber could talk us through the services that NQA are able to provide.
Absolutely. I'll try my best with the numbers because there are quite a few on here and to get through. So as Steve sort of alluded to, we've got a variety of different sustainability services that we offer. When my role was created a couple of years ago, it was very much focused on PAS 2060. It was, all centered around that. That was very much the buzz topic. PAS 2060 is the standard for demonstrating carbon neutrality. So it's a standard that can be adopted a little bit more obscurely because it talks about something called a subject. So we're looking here at organizations, but it could also apply to products, services. I think, Steve, today it's been largely organizations, bar a couple sort of services and other. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely. I think it can apply to events as well. It's quite a
Yeah.
broad range of
Individuals, if anyone fancies
individuals,
it.
families as well. I think if
Yeah.
you're a family, you can seek certification to or verification to, and you can arrange your family's life around the requirements of PAS 2060. And I'm not kidding, it really does say that it's applicable to families. It also requires the overall responsibility to be held by the head of the family, and I just think that will just create lots and lots of arguments and lots of debate. But yeah, it's
I mean, if you're not implementing it for your family, then I think, who
I
are
don't
you?
I don't want to have that fight over who's the head of the family, you see.
Oh dear. So past 2060, all things carbon neutrality. There is an ISO standard which is called ISO 14068-1. Again, apologies for all of the numbers. Essentially, it's the ISO standard which has been published at the back end of last year to supersede PAS 2060. We see this as a positive movement forward. Quite often what happens is a publicly available specification, which is a PAS, is superseded by an ISO standard. It just shows a growing momentum behind it and really adds on that international credibility behind it. So
It's worth maybe, sorry, Amber, it's just
no,
worth
you're
maybe
fine.
they're saying, PAS standards, these publicly available specifications, although they're developed by BSI, they apply internationally. So, any organization around the world can use the PAS standard. And generally speaking, PAS standards, they exist because interested parties and other stakeholders in industry are seeking a standardized way of doing things. ISO standards take a long time to develop. So generally speaking, a PAS standard can be developed quickly in response to industry demand, and very often ISO standard then follows and takes over from the PAS standard. But thinking about the PAS 2060 and the ISO 14068-1 carbon neutrality standards that Amber was talking about there, both of those standards are quite clear in what the requirements are. So both standards require you to quantify your carbon emissions, e.g. using ISO 14064-1. They then require you, and you must do this is something that we check in verifications, to reduce those carbon emissions and to plan to reduce those carbon emissions. PAS 2060 is very clear. You need to year on year reduce. ISO 14068 takes a longer term view and over a cycle. Looks for you to reduce your carbon emissions. So both of them require you to quantify and then reduce. And then with the residual emissions, in other words, what's left after you've reduced as far as you possibly can, ISO 14068 goes a step further, and it introduces the removal of carbon emissions as part of the hierarchy of reduce, then remove, then offset what's left. So ISO 14068 has that requirement around removing carbon emissions.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're in a period at the moment where PAS 2060 is the standard that we deliver. It's something that we're accredited for by UCAS, our governing body. So at the moment, we're sitting tight while we wait for that transition piece over to the new standard. As and when that becomes appropriate, which is looking at later on this year, then we'll be providing more comms around that. But it's a good movement forward that we see at NQA for the carbon neutrality piece. Up next is a standard called ISO 14064-1. Really, this came naturally after PAS 2060 for us. I think what we realized is, PAS 2060 lends itself very well to sort of our small to medium sized clients. And what we realized was that we were almost essentially missing a step in terms of our carbon offering. So for a little bit of background, ISO 14064-1 is a standard which provides quantification and reporting for greenhouse gas emissions and removals. A little bit of a mouthful, like everything seems to be in sustainability. So really what this standard does is it's all around forming your inventory, calculating your carbon footprint and reducing that. So it's essentially sort of a step one, and some clients don't choose to go on to that second step around the carbon neutrality piece. I think it's clear that there's sometimes stigma around carbon offsetting and the carbon neutrality piece. PAS 2060 is the recognized meaningful way of doing that, but 14064-1 gives clients an opportunity to have their carbon data verified and have confidence and credibility around that without needing to go onto that carbon neutral piece. Would you say that's fair to say, Steve?
Yeah, I think so. ISO 14064 has been around for a long time. I think it was first published around about 2006. So it's been around a long time, but the uptake of it has been pretty slow, I think, because the need for companies and organizations to quantify and report on their carbon emissions hasn't been as significant in the past as it is these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve alluded to those different steps with quantifying, reducing, offsetting, documenting, and that sort of being your carbon neutral piece. For 14064-1, it's really those first two stages. So you're quantifying and you're reducing, and then you're not needing to go on to that extra point there. So that lends itself very well to all different types of clients, different industries, different scales. But what we're seeing is that our larger organizations that we deal with are having, pressures that are moving them towards carbon reporting, and ISO 14064-1 being a solution for that. So, some key examples are, the UK government procurement policy note, PPN 0621, which came out mandating organisations bidding for government contracts over 5 million pound, having to report on their carbon footprint and how they're going to reduce that as well. You've got the NHS net zero supplier roadmap, and just in general, we're seeing organisations who are having to input about their carbon figures and their reduction plans in tenders and just general expectations. It's stuff.
I was with a company the other day, Amber, and I've seen this numerous times, but it's just springing to my mind because it was with a company that I was with, and they had supply chain questionnaires from they were involved in manufacturing components for finished products, and the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, the big customer at the end of the supply chain, had sent them a supply chain questionnaire. What are your scope 1 emissions? What are your scope 2 emissions? What are your scope 3 carbon emissions? What are you doing to reduce them? What are you going to do to remove the residual emissions? But crucially, the final question in the tender documentation or the supply chain questionnaire was, when are you going to get all this verified by an external verification body? So it's a real supply chain thing. And you mentioned PPN 0621. It seems to have.
It did.
Yeah, it seems to have, as Amber mentioned, that's the UK government policy procurement note that will require carbon quantification and reduction for certain values of contracts. That came in with a like a butterfly, if you like, and it seems to be picking up pace, and it's like a bang now. I think as of the 1st of April this year, the NHS National Health Service have fully adopted that, and the NHS Sustainability Roadmap also has information around the £5 million threshold.
Yeah.
Not remaining at £5 million and coming down and down and down, which will capture a lot more companies up in the carbon reporting requirements for that purpose.
I mean, there's definitely growing drivers out there. We'll have to do another podcast talking all around the different drivers and different sectors, etc., because it's just something that's evolving and evolving. Leads us on to quite nicely the next standard I'm going to talk about, which is PAS 2080. So PAS 2080 is a specification for carbon management in buildings and infrastructure. So this is a standard. It's not a new standard necessarily, but it had a revision in 2023, which has gained momentum behind it. So PAS 2080 is all around carbon management for the entire value chain of a infrastructure project or program. So
what do you mean by infrastructure, Amber?
Infrastructure, I mean, it covers a number of different things. Sort of wider national infrastructure projects could be things like bridges, roads, all types of different things can fall into that camp. The entire value chain is a terminology that is used within the standard. So when we talk about the entire value chain, we're looking at the whole way through the project. So that could be anything from architects through to construction, through to finance and liability at the back end of it. And what the standard does is set out requirements for the entire value chain and for specific members as well. So it's a standard that's intended to be used collaboratively and sort of as a common approach across the supply chain. So it's something that NQA are very much exploring at the moment. We have an e-learning course on the way for it, so you'll get to hear Mr. Burt's voice in ever more detail, talking all things infrastructure and carbon.
It's droning on and on and on.
To listen to this podcast, yeah. So it's a really prominent area. A key thing behind that has been National Highways putting out a requirement for their contractors and subcontractors to adopt this by the end of 2025. So, I mean, Steve, you're dealing with a lot of, infrastructure, construction type clients, and it seems to be something that's a buzz topic. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the original PAS 2080 document, which I think was 2016, I think, and then they revised it in 2023, and that's really when it's caught fire, if you like, So with the revision in 2023, it went beyond purely infrastructure and took in buildings into its scope as well. It's more of a management system standard, I would say, rather than a carbon quantification standard. PAS 2080 doesn't tell you how to quantify your carbon. You'll need to go back to other standards like ISO 14064-1, for example, to allow you to quantify the carbon. And if you're looking at embodied carbon in the materials that go into infrastructure projects, you might need to look at some EPD side of things, or you might look at environment product declaration side of things, or you might need to look at other life cycle assessment standards. So it's more of a management system standard with procedures and collaboration between the different stages of the value chain that you mentioned, leadership requirements, commitment requirements, and so on. But a really interesting and exciting standard, I think, and I've certainly experienced spike in the number of inquiries and interest that we have in that standard. So I think it's going to be a biggie.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good one to add to the portfolio as well. So that sort of rounds up our carbon services that NQA offer. Looking now at wider sustainability topics, you know, what we've tried to do over the last couple of years is, weigh in on that social element of, ESG factors. I think quite often it's linked heavily with environmental and, rightly so. But we also wanted to have those services out there so that we can tackle sort of social and governance aspects of, wider ESG topics too. So the first of which is a standard called ISO 26000. So ISO 26000, a little bit more obscure for NQA. It's a guidance document which we wouldn't typically deal with, but it's something that we've been working with for the last year or two now, very closely linked to the UN SDGs, the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, and it's about employing, positive social behaviours within your organisation. It's a really nice standard, very much for our forward-thinking organisations, those wanting to weigh in that social element as well. There is an ISO standard coming out, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, 53001.
53,001, more numbers and more acronyms for everybody. But this it's under development by ISO at the minute. It's looking like being a cracking standard as well, this one. It's expected to be published this year, 2024. So it'll be interesting when that one comes out. I anticipate, lots of companies will be interested in that with the focus on those UN SDGs.
Too many acronyms and abbreviations.
Easy for me to say.
So lastly is a standard called ISO 21221. This is a really exciting standard, or at least Steve and I think so, because we've got a dream of getting in Glastonbury at one point of time. It's an events management system standard.
I want the Formula One as well, and the golf.
We'll just write a long list.
Yeah, maybe a football club or two might be nice.
So ISO 21221 is management system standard. So it's back with that Annex SL structure, similarly to, ISO 9001, ISO 27001, etc. So it can be easily integrated there. It's all around the management behind the events rather than necessarily purely focused on the event itself. It's, the management system behind it, ensuring that it's being run as sustainably as it can. So that looks at, the supply chain, working with contractors, through from planning to executing the event and each stage. Steve actually is one of our assessors for ISO 21221. So it might be worth you adding, Steve, any sort of tips or tricks that you've seen around 21221. It's definitely growing momentum this year, we've seen, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's primarily aimed at event management companies, so those organising events. As you can imagine, event management involves lots and lots of suppliers in the supply chain. So you have things like, even down to the level of the security, the catering, the venue itself, which is obviously a big consideration, the audio visual equipment, the name badges, the stands, the stand shells, all that type of thing. So it's a standard that focuses quite heavily, not entirely, but quite heavily on the supply chain and helping or encouraging this, the events organizers to help and encourage the suppliers into the event to do things in a more sustainable way. And that's achieved by the event management company setting their own objectives to influence their supply chain, selecting those particular suppliers through tender documentation that have the strongest sustainability commitments. So I love auditing that standard, and the reason I love auditing that standard is we get out to some interesting events for a start, but also a lot of the audit process is around sitting down with the suppliers and talking to them about their performance and what they've been doing to improve it, to help the event be run more sustainably. And, you know, I've got a real belief in standardization and ISO standards and so on. I really do think, you know, I believe that they help businesses to improve. But certainly with ISO 21221, you know, it's very tangible when you're at these events that it's been run in a manner that's attempting to make it more sustainable, really. So yeah, a great standard. Always enjoy auditing that one.
Yeah, and I mean, even you think back to the origin of the standard, the GB Olympics 2012, and that's really where this standard came from. So, you know, it's a really interesting one. It's a really good one that we want to be part of. It's worth noting, you know, sort of as we come to an end of running through those standards, that we run through a lot of webinars where we sort of have a deeper dive into the specific standards, so you can hear a little bit more about them. And of course, these podcasts are going to dive into more specific areas of these specific standards as well, so it can go into a little bit more detail there.
No, that's a brilliant overview of the products and services that we offer. I mean, it's a growing thing. You know, it's a hot topic, as we said, getting hotter all the time, as we said. And it's interesting that you know, we try to practice what we preach at NQA. So we ourselves, we have a carbon quantification process. We've done this internally since 2019. And then 2021, 22, and Amber and I are deep in the numbers of putting together our 2023 carbon emissions data at the minute as well. But you know, NQA's our own carbon impact, it's relatively limited. You know, we have teams of people, a lot of them are based at home, a lot of them are based in our office, a lot of them go out each day in various forms of transport, including cars and occasionally planes as well, and perform the audits. But we've had some really significant improvements. You know, NQA's managed to reduce its own internal carbon footprint year on year. We measure it primarily in absolute terms, where there's reduction, but also we measure it using intensity factors. So things like, you know, tons of CO2 per on-site audit day that we deliver, or tons of CO2 per audit day we deliver, tons of CO2 per full-time member of staff. All of those measures show fantastic improvements. So we've got that experience internally of all the ways and the means of managing and achieving carbon reductions, that, you know, it's something we're always happy to add value and share when we conduct verifications with and certifications with our clients as well. So I think that probably brings us to an end. We've been talking for longer than we planned, I think, but that's fine. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time to join us for this initial podcast, Sustainability Simplified podcast. Hopefully that's given you a nice introduction to who we are as the team and helped to put some voices to names. And we will advertise soon what the subsequent podcast topics will be. If anybody's got any suggestions for future podcast topics, we'd very much welcome that. But yeah, really looking forward to putting more of these together. So from myself, thank you very much indeed, and goodbye.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for listening, and have a nice day.